It's a way to live with the pain. A vampirism scratching at my neck won't leave me alone. Will you see yourself back in the sun? The light it stings while the night it sings to me. And I'm normal how a story I can't tell, but they'll see the gift they've given to me. I could step aside, I could end this life, but this disease, it won't release, it won't be cured by the night. I guess I'm never coming back.
Good evening and welcome to the St. By Night Twitch channel where we play St. Petersburg by Night, a massive multiplayer 5th edition World of Darkness Chronicle set in the city of St. Petersburg, Florida. My name is Kent, also known as Misha Kent on all social media, and I am the lead storyteller of St. Pete by Night. But tonight, because it's Saturday, I get to play the role of host, and this is After Dark. After Dark, for those who don't know already, is our behind-the-scenes program where we talk to storytellers, we talk to players, we talk to movers and shakers in the World of Darkness community. And lucky for me, we've had a string of fantastic interviews lately where we've got to talk to professional storytellers from all over the world. And tonight is no exception, as tonight we are going to be talking to Onur Temel, all the way from Turkey, who is joining us, a member of the Start Playing community. Onur has run over 350 games for Start Playing, ranging from D&D to World of Darkness Chronicles. Everything you can imagine. This individual has done it all, and this is probably one of our biggest gets because Rebecca, one of our PR people, one of our storytellers, was so excited to have gotten a response back from Onur, and so we are very, very pleased to have them as our guest tonight. So, Onur, welcome to After Dark. Why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself?
My goodness, thank you. I'm humbled. Again, hello. I'm Onur. I've just turned 25 last week. Yeah. A little little trivia. I have been doing professional games for 3 years, about the same time that I've officially got into tabletop games. And I've been overall interested since I think I was like 17, 18. What else can I say? I guess
There's so much in just that little bit. Like in that statement alone, I'm blown away by so many things. One, 25, only been doing this for 3 years, and yet I would say that you have surpassed accomplishments of people almost double your age, including myself, who is 40 and has been doing World of Darkness for about 30 years. But I'm so impressed by how much you've accomplished, how much you've done. Even in the bit of research I was able to look into what you're doing, I was not even nearly as organized and ready and capable of doing those things at the age you just turned. So happy belated birthday from all of us, first of all.
Thank you very much. And honestly, again, I am very humbled. Thank you.
Oh, well, I'm very happy to have you here. And I would love to hear about this journey and unpack all of the information from this. So you got into TTRPGs, storytelling, everything about 3 years ago, but you said you've been interested in it for about the last 7 or 8 years. When did you first hear about TTRPGs, and did you have any preconceived notions about them before doing so? Like, had you heard about it but weren't really that interested, or it didn't really cross your path? And what were you thinking about it before you decided to actually start to explore it?
This is actually great because so as a little also side note, I have ADHD, and a lot of hyperfixations, a lot of dopamine kicks. So I remember pretty much like every step of the way. So the first time I got kind of exposed to it was when I was playing Tales from Borderlands.
Okay.
Where there's that little like montage where they're traveling and in the caravan they're playing this board game, and I'm like, this looks interesting with like little figures on the board. What is this? And I go to Google and I look around, and I found that it's something called, D&D. And later on, I also get exposed to it on when I was watching Stranger Things at the age of like 17, 18. And then I just kind of got like, I was very interested in it. I got passively, like researching, never actively getting into groups or games. At the time, I was preparing for uni, so I didn't have that opportunity. But after that, for a couple of years, I just kind of like looked into it, and then my full interest officially kickstarted when Baldur's Gate 3 became open to early access in 2021 August. And I was like, this is so awesome. I need to talk to my friends about it. I need to get into it. And luckily for me, one of my friends was running a game that I heard was called Hunter the Reckoning. I was like, this sounds very interesting. And I got in. And it was very fun. It was a shorter campaign, shorter chronicle. And after we finished that chronicle, because like my friend group was aware of my interest, they were like, "Would you like to run a game for us?" Like the GM was very willing to step down, and he was like, "Hey, if you want to run."
It's the
But
bane of GMs and storytellers everywhere. Is like,
exactly,
we get to run, but who runs for us? And whenever we
exactly.
see an opportunity,
I
we're
didn't
going
get
to
it at the
leap at
time.
it. Yeah.
I
Oh,
didn't get
it's
it at the time. I didn't get that I was being handed a double-edged sword.
it's a trap.
um,
You're
it
trapped
was,
now.
yes, it was. I am, but honestly, it's a very fun trap to be in. I've gotten into running for my friends. We first did Vampire the Masquerade, and then I started working my way up from. We started with fifth edition, and I really got like hooked in fifth edition, and after about some time of running at home, I was like, why people surely do this professionally, and looked into it. Um, it took me some time to start playing, but once I realized how people went about this job, I also decided that I'd like to do that as my profession, and I got in it. I officially started my first professional game in April 2022.
Wow, that's incredible in its own right to go from just kind of getting into it to having the courage and the boldness to just be like, you know what, I'm going to try to do this professionally. I'm going to try running games for strangers. It is a big thing because a lot of people have to go through various stages, and I've learned that from talking to a lot of people on this very show, but also just from my own experience of like, you start out with your friend group and then your friend group expands and then you add a couple
Yeah.
strangers to the mix, and it's like a long-term process, but you were driven and dedicated enough to take this to the next level. And I think it's interesting that you came in through the video game route. I hear a lot of interesting origin stories, like I had
Hmm.
family who were really into
Oh
it,
yeah.
or I had friends who introduced me to it. But Baldur's Gate, perfect introduction. I remember the
Was.
first Baldur's Gate video game coming out all those years ago, and then that's a really good access point, and I think it's something that D&D and even World of Darkness have done really well in by blending and crossing genres into video games and not just tabletops. It expands the opportunity for people to learn about this product in this setting in this world and get involved. I also found it interesting because you're one of the very, very few people I've talked to that Hunter was their access point into the world of darkness. Most
Hmm.
people I've spoken to have either come in through mostly Vampire, honestly. Vampire is the
Yeah.
access point for most people. But the
Yeah.
fact that it was Hunter for you was very, very interesting for me, and is a very cool, kind of unique path that you're taking. But I want to ask you, what is the TTRPG environment like in Turkey? Because you said you had a lot of trouble finding games, you had a lot of trouble, getting avenues to get in. Now the internet
Hmm.
has made that a lot easier for all of us through
Yes.
services like Start
Thank God.
Playing. But we usually start on a local level of like seeing games in a game
Mhm.
shop or anything like that. What's it like in Turkey as opposed to the American experience that most of us know?
Mhm. It's definitely not on the same level. What I've seen, there are certain content creators on YouTube and Twitch who do try their best, or to just kind of, as a little fun thing that they want to share with people, make their content related to tabletops. I have seen someone run in the World of Darkness, but not using the World of Darkness system, for example, because they were doing Fate and they were trying to also
Sure.
advertise and share Fate, which was, like interesting blend. But overall, I think tabletops aren't that widely known, which I would also like to change if eventually I do hope to do my own content in my own language, so people can be introduced to tabletops and specifically World of Darkness, because I think there could be a lot of interest in it. We even had our own vampire show at some point in on TV, but didn't last too long, sadly.
Well, and you've
Um,
got a lot of accomplishments under your belt. You're a writer, a translator, a storyteller, and like you said, a budding content creator in your description for your Start Playing page. So I think, even based off of our interaction so far, you're a perfect ambassador to kind of introduce
thank you.
this stuff. You are very friendly, absolutely humble despite everything you've accomplished, which you should more than brag about. And I think that you have the experience now of playing with a international audience and having various experiences to be able to bring people into this crazy world we have. So I think you're well on your way to
Thank you.
accomplishing that goal. So talk to me about your first TTRPG experience overall. You said you did Baldur's Gate. What was the
Yes.
first time when you sat down at a table with the dice, with the sheets, and what do you remember about that overall experience?
Okay. Um, so the first game I was in, because some of us lived in different cities, had to be virtual tabletop. And at the time, dice was something I couldn't afford. So we mainly did virtual roles, and I didn't really have that, like, oh, like the books and the dice feeling. The first time I did do actually tabletop was when I was running it. I had invited my table, one of whom lives in Istanbul. I live in Izmir. Um, over to my place, and he was gonna stay with us for some days during the summer. And I was like, well, now that we're all here, why don't we gather around and play together? And we had printed out the sheets. We still had to use Roll20 and Discord for roles, but that experience itself was definitely a lot more magical. Um, because when you're around the same table, people are less likely, from what I've seen at least, to pick up the phone and start like stimming. They pay a little bit more attention, since you are able to like, maintain eye contact better. They are able to tell when you're addressing them a little easier. But that experience itself was a lot of fun. I would definitely love to gather around with people in real life and um, roll my dice. I do have physical dice now. I do have physical copies of the books now. Thankfully I'm able to afford that. So I have all of that, and I just love that feeling of like putting the dice in my hands. Just especially as the storyteller, that terror when I start to slowly put dice in my hands as they watch me.
Oh, it's
It's so
so intimidating.
satisfying.
It's
Oh
one of our
yes,
best tools is that we could just pick up
absolutely,
one dice and then another, and it's just like
absolutely.
growing tension.
Absolutely. And like now I've done it a couple times. So now my like one of my players tried to mitigate it, and he's just trying to bully us, and I'm like, Am I?
Am
Am
I
I
or am I
really? Or
not?
did you forget something? You know?
Well, you get to
It's just
add
so much
things
fun.
like the storyteller screen. Like, I think there's nothing that
Yes.
rivals the in-person experience. Like the
100% agreed.
those it's you can play the same group with the same game, the same setting, but when you put the in-person versus virtual experience, it changes the game entirely. There's just a whole different
Absolutely.
atmosphere and there's a whole different experience. And so I encourage all those people who discovered TTRPGs during the pandemic, online, you
Hmm.
got to get an in-person group together because it is
Absolutely.
it is far and above my favorite experience of all.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
luckily, here in the states, we've got a lot of stores and
Hmm.
places that offer in-person gaming experiences. Hopefully, that will increase in other countries. Hopefully, the materials
Hopefully.
will be more accessible in other countries as books get translated and everything like
Hmm.
that. But yeah, it is a unique and amazing
Definitely.
experience to have. So
Definitely.
What do you remember about that first Hunter game? What did you play? What was the story about? How long did you play for? Like, tell me about
Mhm.
that.
For sure. Um, we played the first edition of Hunter the Reckoning, where we were playing as the imbued, um, and the story was more focused on like it was a mix of a vampire and demon antagonists. I played as a judge at the time, which I think they've like turned it into like a different creed now. I can't quite remember it from the top of my head. But I was mainly playing an investigator and I was doing more crowd control. It was fun. The investigation was a lot of fun. We had a little mole in the party who did her best to try and betray us. Bless her heart. um, what I did notice from that table, though, while it was fun, I did notice, for example, going into stuff like PvPs at the table, it has to be discussed and session how important session zeros and safety tools are to make sure no one's feelings are hurt because we got that reveal way later on, and while we took it with grace. I was still kind of hurt by that because I was trying to tell a story. It costed my character a little bit. At the end, I sadly died, but hey, martyr. Um, martyr to the
And a
cause.
lot of
But it
good
was a
World
fun
of
game.
Darkness stories end that way, you know?
Exactly.
There's no
Exactly.
happy endings in the World of Darkness. It's just prolonging
Exactly.
the tragedy till the
Exactly.
end. What was it about the World of Darkness experience, or was there a particular moment where you really got hooked into that particular system? Because a lot of people will dabble with it or try it, find it's not for them, or end up loving it. What was
Mhm,
it about the World of Darkness, Hunter, Vampire, Werewolf,
mhm.
whatever the case may be? When did you feel the pull and really feel hooked into that system?
Um, I felt as Hunter as the perfect beginner system, which I still agree to this day. I think for World of Darkness, if someone has never played a single game, I think Hunter is definitely the best introductory setting. You can have a one shot or a short chronicle, or as long as you need it to go to kind of ease the player into the world. But as far as the system goes, it was definitely Vampire that made me fully fall for World of Darkness. Because Hunter was a lot of fun. It introduced me to the world, as mentioned. But when I got into Vampire and when I read all the system of this, what Storyteller system offers, the drama, the role play, the angst, it really appealed to me so much, and the mechanics that have been provided to highlight those themes that the world offers and this game offers. Like it really blended well together, and I was like, "This is my jam. I really like this."
Absolutely.
And yeah, exactly. The more I ran it, the more accustomed to it I got. The easier it became to just fully get hooked into it, essentially.
I've found too with World of Darkness as opposed to like a D&D or a Pathfinder or many of the other systems out there, it's one of the more grounded in reality systems or settings that I've found.
Definitely.
Like you said, Hunter is a fantastic access point for a lot of newer players because it's like you are playing a human just like any other human. You just know you've pulled back the veil a little bit about this secret society of monsters that exists in your world, and I think
Exactly.
we can all put ourselves in those kind of shoes. Whereas, like, I'll never know what it is to be an elf ranger. I'll never know
Yeah.
what it is to be, a dwarf cleric. Like, I
Exactly.
can only like access that to a certain point. But I know what it is to be a human living in our modern world, having to contend with all of our, everyday struggles, all of our real life struggles, and then the possibility that there's something behind it all, like there's a deeper layer or
Mhm.
something terrifying that we all have heard stories about, that we've all,
Exactly.
had mythos about. There's something that's just very, very real and accessible to me about that I can't get from other gaming systems. I play D&D. I'm always going to picture Lord of the Rings, or I'm going to picture something they've shown me because I've never lived in that world, but I've lived in the
In
world of
this world,
darkness. I
exactly.
have. And so
Exactly.
it's a lot more accessible. One of the biggest challenges I've seen people take with the World of Darkness, though, is running games from places that they are not originally from or
Ah.
places they've ever been. Have you
Mhm.
encountered that challenge, and how do you overcome it? Like, do you put in a great deal of research, or do you just kind of roll with it and take what you know from media? Like, how do you handle running games in a different location?
I have most of my games I've run that have been in locations that I've never been to. I've run a Venice Chronicle. And still running a Chronicle set in Prague. At some point, I will probably run a Chronicle that takes place in Paris. Um, and generally, what I do is something also Jason Carl has advised doing or mentioned that he does. Um, is watching night videos, like night walk videos, to get a better feel of the streets, of the locations, of landmarks, and I then go on to research, taking a little page from Chicago by Night 5th edition, just researching what is correct about, the common knowledge about a given city and what is false. I look into that, and from the information that I gather, I try to breathe a little bit of a life from me, to make the city have a spirit that I feel connected to. And I try to reflect that into the people that they interact with, into the vampires that they talk to nightly, and in hunting scenes with the blood. So, for example, if a city is generally doing well, if I want the city to feel like an inviting hub of life, I try to make the city more colorful. I take some time to mention certain activities such as like festivals or concerts, or the buzz of life. I try to give more sanguine blood when there is hunting, or if I'm doing a hunter chronicle, I try to make them spend more time with touchstones that are happy moments. And when I want that city, like, it's all about basically giving the feeling of the city and giving that spirit of the city to make it a character. And that I found it makes it easier for me as I run it, as the sessions progress, to better understand and better describe my surroundings and this city that I've never really been to.
I'm so astounded that you have discovered one of the best storytelling secrets for World of Darkness. It took me years, and you've done that in 3 years, where you're like, yeah, the city's a character. You're absolutely right. And if you want to give an organic storytelling experience, you want to give the feel of that location and of that city. And you've uncovered all that already. Again, amazing
Thank you.
accomplishment.
Thank you.
But I'm really glad that you brought up the Jason Carl GoPro videos, because we had
Mhm.
another individual who was a guest here mention that. And I think it's so profound because, yeah, you can read books, you can watch
Mhm.
tourism videos. They're going to show you a side of the location, but they're not going to necessarily show you the true organic experience. They're going to show you what they
Exactly.
want you to see, not necessarily what day to day life is. Whereas those walks, like you said, those night walks and those GoPro videos, that's a person living there, experiencing it, indulging in it, and you really are getting
Exactly.
to see the full boots on the ground experience that you can't get from like Google Maps or Google
Exactly.
Earth or anything like that. And it does really put you in the vibe, and you can get the sounds
Absolutely.
and the sights of the city and all of those little details that make storytelling so special.
Yes.
So that's so awesome. What do you think is like the biggest difference? Because you run a wide variety of games. I mean, just looking at your list of what you've gotten into and accomplished over your time already, what do you think are the biggest differences between World of Darkness games and other games that you run?
Biggest difference. I think World of Darkness is the best blend of mechanics and storytelling. I think it's like, for example, a system like Kids on Bikes is focused far less on the mechanics and the dice rolling and a lot more on the story that you're telling. Similarly with Monster Hearts, like, dice rolling isn't the most important thing. The stats aren't the most important thing. It's the story that you're telling. Whereas, D&D can be more complicated with its mechanics. Same with Pathfinder. Though admittedly, I've never run Pathfinder,
Yeah, you've run D&D. It's the same thing.
I
A little more mechanics
don't want to
heavy,
anger
but
anyone who plays or runs
it's fine.
Pathfinder.
They
So
can
I'm just
come at
gonna.
me. They can come at me. It's the same thing. It's D&D 3.5, and then we all know it. Anyway, please continue.
But it can get like a little bit more. The story can gear towards the mechanics, whereas I find World of Darkness is just the mechanics supporting the story in the best possible way. The backgrounds, the advantages, and the flaws, being able to create a story or being rewarded or taken away as a result of a character's choice during play, I feel is that like really perfect blend. I also like when I'm doing World of Darkness, is I try to decide who an NPC I'm creating is first before I decide which clan or which creed or which tribe they are going to be in, because that makes them a person first and then a supernatural creature. And once I get that down, the mechanics that I give them, the disciplines, the gifts, the edges, they just complement and enhance their character and makes them stand out as unique individuals.
Ugh,
Besides their ambitions and desires, of course.
another like such a valuable lesson for storytellers to learn. Again, you learning it so quickly. Like, yes, that's exactly the way to approach it. And I have to constantly tell my players and people that I'm introducing to the game, like, just make a person, a standard,
Yeah,
everyday, run of the mill person, and then I will kill them and make them a vampire with you. Like, it'll make
exactly.
sense once we start with the person, because I think in a lot of role playing games, people start with the clans or the
Yes.
spells they can do or the class or whatever, the mechanical end of things is. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No,
But rather,
absolutely.
I think that the best thing to do is to, if you are trying to go in a specific direction, like you want to make a Toreador, you can take influences from that and say, like, okay, if I want this character to end up a Toreador, I'm going to make them a painter or a lover of art or a performer
Exactly.
of some kind. And you can build off of that rather than just saying, okay, it's a Toreador, their name's Tom, they have presence 3. Like, no
Exactly. Like,
backstory, no reason. Like, especially in World of Darkness and especially in Vampire the Masquerade, those people are embraced into that clan because of who they were as a person, because of what they were
mhm,
before. And so I think it's
exactly.
really important to start with what their regular human life was, what made them so appealing to the vampires
Hmm.
that they got embraced. And you can be, go against the grain and be the revenge embrace that you should
Yeah,
have been a
absolutely.
Toreador, but you
The
became a
accident.
Nosferatu or whatever the case is. But I think it's even more special to really go with the grain. You're going to have a better
Absolutely.
time going with the grain because everybody wants to be a snowflake. And frankly,
Hmm.
you get lost in the
To
blizzard. It doesn't
Yes, you
stand
do.
out when
Yes,
everyone's
you
doing
do.
it.
I do agree.
So, yeah.
Definitely going with the grain is better, and I think World of Darkness is the best setting that allows that to happen. Any system can make that happen, obviously. With the right game master, with the right player, all of this can be done. It makes little difference, but I think World of Darkness is the best one that complements that.
Now, I would ask you, as opposed to that, what do you think World of Darkness lacks as a system? What do you think like are some of the missing pieces? And you can of course be diplomatic about your answer. I
The book
understand. We're
layouts.
not looking to piss anybody off, but like yeah, what do you think is something that they could improve upon or expound upon or that you would challenge them to try and go into more depth about? Whether it's
Um,
mechanically or otherwise.
that's a good question. Um, I did jokingly say the book layouts, particularly for Vampire, but
You're
and
not
that was
wrong
only half a
there.
joke. Yeah, but I think on a more serious note, perhaps expanding on the themes that have been introduced and the world in a more physical manner. Like to give an example from Vampire, the book came out the core book came out in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, and it has taken us 6 years to get some sort of clues on what the Gehenna War and the Beckoning might be, whereas these things I believe should have been introduced a little earlier, or for example, like the Bloodstained Love, which deals more in romance and between vampires, and gives more details in considered play. Same with Player's Guide, for example, having a section about how to play a Malkavian without being a fish milk, as we like to say. I think these should be these shouldn't necessarily be put in different books constantly, and instead we should be able to have an easier access and a quicker access to these, because when you first get into it, like I'm not any native English speaker, so some concepts I have to translate and then put into perspective in my mind, which takes my time getting used to, which reflects in the way in the way I run my games. um, Having that access earlier and easier would make it easier for me as a GM, as a storyteller, to better portray that in my stories, and for my players to understand that quicker and easier, and perhaps like that concept enough to get more into it, to explore it in the future. So I think that's the thing that World of Darkness could improve upon. Like having 7 clans in one book is like wasn't the best. Like I missed my Ravnos.
Oh,
I
for
missed
sure.
my Zimitsi.
For sure.
And don't get me wrong, those aren't my favorite clans. But I still love them a lot, and I would have liked to see them in the initial publish of it.
That's something
Um,
they did so well in the older editions, and as again
mhm,
somebody who's been flirting with the World of Darkness for 30 years, like I've
mhm,
seen the editions pass and the changes they've made over it, and having all of the clans in the core book was totally fundamental.
mhm.
I can give World of Darkness a little bit of grace on the time period it's taken to get
That
where
is
they
true.
are now, because they had publisher issues, they had production
Yeah.
issues, they had rewrites, all kinds of things that these companies go
Yes.
through. So I totally
100%.
understand that, but there is definitely something to be said for, like, you introduce a concept like the beckoning in the core book, but you only give me a couple of paragraphs on it. You're
Hmm.
not telling me what it actually is, how it actually works mechanically. You're just saying, hey, something's making the elders go away. It's not
Yeah.
even specifying which elders are being taken by it, why they're like specific elders.
Exactly.
It's just this mystical, unknown
Hmm.
concept. And for those of us coming from the old editions, we're used to everything being laid out very
Hmm.
clearly and in a lot of
Hmm.
detail. Having entire, books released about one subject matter or one small piece.
Hmm.
And for
Hmm.
them to have released so many books since the Camarilla book, the Sabat book, the Anarch book,
Yeah.
all these
Yeah.
supplements, and now we're finally getting to it in Gehenna. And,
Yeah.
even then, the book's been delayed, so we're having to wait a couple more months than we thought we
Yeah.
would, and all these things. It's really frustrating. Like I'm
Hmm.
curious as to what the mindset is or what the plan is on the corporate side of things, or at least on the creative
Hmm.
side of things, as to why they're doing the releases the way they are. Because Bloodstained Love, though surprisingly it's turned out to be a decent read and a decent book, did not need to come before the Gehenna War book. It did
No, I
not need to
agree. I
come
agree.
before the player's guide. Like, we
Hmm.
needed some of these things a lot sooner than we
Sooner,
got them.
definitely,
Uh,
definitely.
and this weird release strategy they're going under has me
Hmm.
confused. But also I want it. I want it in my
Yeah,
hands as soon
same,
as
same.
possible.
Absolutely,
I've
absolutely.
pre-ordered everything they've released, and I'm just sitting here like, you gotta get this to me, because I want to do right by their vision. You know,
Hmm.
I think every storyteller, every DM understands that we can do whatever we want. Rules are,
Hmm.
guidelines, settings are
Hmm.
flexible, obviously. But for those of us who want to stay true to the
Hmm.
concepts and not be contradicted by future books, we need that information, and we need it as quickly as possible. What are your thoughts in regards to that, as far as, like, trying to stay true to the material, trying to research into older editions? Like, how do you incorporate all that, and what are your thoughts on it?
um so nice that you like made that segue, because I wanted to like touch upon that as well. I do agree that I would give grace in terms of like for example, in Gehenna War, they were trying, and the Beckoning, they were trying to give the storytellers that freedom of movement to do whatever we want with it, which I do appreciate a lot. I think it's really nice that storytellers are given that freedom a little like from the meta plot, because there would be a lot of also players who want to stick by the meta plot, but the storyteller might not be interested in telling a meta plot based story. Maybe they want a more just personally driven, focusing on the drama and the tragedy of becoming a vampire rather than the massive vampire
Yeah, the
conspiracy of
personal story, the
elders. Yeah,
personal
exactly.
journey.
Which I do love. Like that's why I liked fifth edition a little more than 20th. And it's not just on the 20th. I still like
No, for
20th
sure.
and the former editions. I just like that different change from the meta plot focus to the personal focus, the personal horror aspect of vampire. Um, and I think it is so, that's nice that we get that freedom, but I also do like you said, I also do like like sticking a little closer to the established lore as well. Like I don't want to be like, so actually in my canon Hardestad is still alive. Like I don't
Right.
like doing that. I do like sticking to that vision that has been provided in the books, and I would like a little bit more detail on what that vision was in a lenient manner. Like I I don't need everything laid out step by step, but I would really appreciate like the beckoning could be these things. Here are some ideas, or don't take them, do whatever you want. But here's what we thought that you could employ, which I do think they have heard this feedback in Paradox and in White Wolf and implanted it, because otherwise I don't think we'd be getting stuff like Crimson Gutter or Gehenna War.
Right.
Um, so I think it's a good thing. I think it's needed for storytellers who like it when it's step by step, and for storytellers like me who still like to have it in case they need a referral point, in case they find a concept they like and would like to tell that story.
Well, and I certainly think it goes without saying, like every core book for the last 10 years at least, if not 15, 20 years, in the first 10, 15 pages, they're like, hey, just so you know, you can do whatever you want. Like this,
Exactly.
when nobody's holding your feet over the fire
Mhm.
saying you have to run it a certain way. So I think that's been ingrained enough in this newer generation of TTRPGers and even in the old guard that it's like, hey, you've always had that flexibility.
Mhm.
But if they are going to introduce new concepts, if they're going to throw stuff in there, it would be really nice if they were like, this is how we picture it, but of course you can
Mhm.
do whatever you want. Or, the killing of Hardestadt for some of us older players, that's huge.
Yeah.
Like, that is a huge concept. You're just kind of tossing into a lore sheet and a little bit in a
Yeah. By the
book.
way, he's dead.
Like, and
Sorry.
Theo Bell killed him, and like all this, you're really throwing us all for a loop.
Mhm.
So while I agree with you that like give them the flexibility, you don't need to break it down into the nitty gritty details. There are some of us who definitely wouldn't mind those details of like who was
Exactly.
there, why did they do it, what was the motivation, like what's the inner workings. And World of Darkness has always, for its whole existence, teased us with that kind of stuff. Like,
Mhm.
oh,
Mhm.
what's happening with Lucida de Aragon or what's
Ah, yeah.
happening with
Yeah,
Lucind.
yeah.
And
Mhm.
we're like, I don't know. Tell me. Tell me what's happening. I can choose to use it or I can
Or
choose to
not,
ignore it,
exactly.
but at least tell me where your head was at or what your
Mhm.
thought process was for making these events happen. And, it's gonna have a grandiose, overarching story impact. Theo Bell is no longer Camarilla for the first
No.
time in 200
Decades, right?
years. Like, what does that mean? And what are we supposed to do with that? And what was at least your thinking in doing
Mhm.
that move or making that move?
Mhm.
And so I'm hoping that, like you said, World of Darkness has heard the feedback, that they are making those adjustments, and that they are heading in that direction. And so I have really high hopes for the Gehenna War book, but I've been burned before, so I'm
Mhm.
I'm cautiously optimistic about the whole
Mhm.
thing,
Mhm.
because I've also seen books where
Understandable.
I'm like, this didn't even need to be a book. This could have been an email. Thank you.
Yeah.
We didn't need a whole book about this.
Yeah, I
Um,
do agree. I do
so
agree.
it is kind of cautious optimism, but we'll see when
Mhm.
the book drops
Mhm.
later this year. But it is good, and hopefully we are getting some answers. That
Definitely.
being said, how does lore play a part in your games? How much do you incorporate lore? How much have you yourself been, interested in the lore, or have you
Mhm.
gone on White Wolf Wiki deep dives? Have you,
Oh yes.
done all that kind of stuff? How much does it appeal to you? What's some of your favorite lore? What do you think are some of the big mistakes? Just let's talk about lore for a little bit
For
here.
sure, for sure. So it entirely depends on my group in general. I like the lore. I like putting tidbits from the lore. But also I try to look at what my players want to do before I decide how much of a deep dive I'm gonna do. Because if I'm playing like with bunch of characters who want to just deal with the fact that they are now immortal undead blood drinkers and want to interact more with their touchstones or have that the perplexed relationship with their sires or with the prince, then lore takes a little bit more of a background. It's kind of like basically like not running a magic game when there are no Tremirs or Banu Hakim or Hekatas around. Because then we kind of wasted. Like if no one is a cult, why do the occult chronicle?
Right.
But generally, I do like the lore a lot. I like to be like a little prepared as best as I can. Um, I like I said, I go into White Wolf Wiki, do deep dives into like what is the lore of the city, like what do we know about it? What has been presented to me? How much do I need to prepare myself, and how much can I take from the established canon? The biggest challenge I faced with that is my most recent chronicle that takes place in my city, and the last thing that has like been published about my city was in like it was in Dark Ages in 23rd edition, and the last bit of like plot from it is like from 1200s.
Yeah.
And that's just like a big little section in the book. So I had to basically take that and then pretty much write on top of it what I felt like was appropriate. But I do plan that history because I think that also forms the vampires that are in court, that if it's Camarilla, or forms the anarch gangs that take their territories in different parts of a city. So I do my best to know as much as possible in previous editions, because this new version of World of Darkness, this soft reboot that they have done, still takes the concept that they have already introduced in the previous editions. They just kind of got rid of the whole Time of Judgment timeline and instead build upon it in a different narrative. And I do like taking that pre-Time of Judgment sources from reading up on them and taking the things that I like from them and changing stuff that I didn't find is relevant or is appealing to the story that I want to tell. I try to do that mix as best as I can.
I love hearing your clearly informed, educated perspective on this because lore, I'm
I,
always been a fan
I'm
of
gonna
lore.
blush.
I take a lot from lore, even if I'm not going to use a lot of it. I always try to have it have a presence because we're talking about 33 years of hard work that writers have put in that goes
Absolutely.
back to the dawn of time, that goes back to, all of this stuff. And I think that all of that shapes where we are and where we're going. So the meta plot, regardless of if you're going to have the characters interact with it or not, it still is a present thing. It's still a thing that
Definitely.
shaped the setting as we know it. And you
Mhm.
have a very cool and unique opportunity because you're in real life kind of in the center of where it all began, where it all started to take shape, before the Americas became a thing and everything
Mhm.
like that. Like that's where the action was. Romania and Turkey and all of this, like that was a big part of where a lot of vampire mythos started, even in real
Mhm.
life, and where a lot of this stuff took shape. So you're in such a cool spot. But like you said, it's kind of a blank slate after Dark Ages. They
Yes,
don't really
it
return
is.
to that area or talk a lot about that area, but that
No,
also
sadly
provides a
not.
unique opportunity for you as a storyteller to really make your mark, to
Mhm.
create something that isn't going to be contradicted. A lot of the US out here, I mean, there's a lot of areas that go untouched, but there's a lot of areas that have a lot of detail.
Mhm.
Chicago how do you run a game in Chicago without using the Chicago by Night book? They've set up all these expectations and all of these details. So depending on the types of players you're working with, you may get a really educated player who's like, that's not the prince. Jackson's the prince. And like, where's the kids a loading and all this other stuff. Whereas with a brand new player, they wouldn't know the difference at all. But we've got a whole variety of people in our community. We've got people who've read the old novels that were released from back in the day that are like, well, this person was the Prince of Tampa. And I was like, oh, I hadn't read that novel. Like, even I am like, oh, yeah, I guess I'm contradicting that a little bit, aren't I? And so I think, yeah, like lore is always going to be prevalent, and flexible players can go with it. Less flexible players will buck against it if it, goes against the lore. So I do think that a certain foundation of understanding is good to have, regardless of the case. But yeah, you do have this blank slate. You do have this opportunity to create it in the image that you want it to have, and I think that's super super cool, and a great opportunity, but also a huge challenge as a storyteller too, because it's like now I really have nothing to work with from except from 800 years ago, and that's a lot can happen in 800 years, especially in kindred society. So that's got to be a unique challenge. What do you think of the future for that particular area? Do you think they're ever going to eventually come back to that and get involved with that? Because there's a lot that could potentially come of this Gehenna source material about that area, or at least areas nearby. You're very close-ish to the cradle of civilization where this is all supposedly happening. So do you think you're going to get more material about that area, or do you think that it is going to be still this kind of unknown?
I think it's going to be a little bit of both. I think they're trying to be cautious about it, which I understand. Because they're trying to base it off of real life events, but doing that when it's still recent, when it's not become history, can cause a lot of contradictions, which they suffered one in with the Camarilla book before. So I think they are trying to approach it cautiously. They also did a little what was the word? Little change to the initial Gehenna War is happening in the Middle East to a Gehenna War is happening all around the globe with the Sabbat book.
Right.
So like I think they're going to tentatively start exploring with again vague terms, with vague story elements, kind of like there's this beckoning that someone's elders, and we're gonna get something vague again, but it'll build up on the initial vagueness and give the storytellers that opportunity to be like, here you go, do whatever. But I think they will, with like Gehenna War, for example, and with perhaps future source material, they will try to better categorize, better detail the initial concept that has been introduced, add a little bit more subtext, perhaps, to help the storytellers and perhaps help the players be more interested. Because like you said, there's a lot of like really detailed American cities, and like most of the chronicles seem to take place for a lot of players in the US. The first game I ran took place in the US. Then I was like, I'm just gonna actually change that a little bit. I want to go back to Europe. I want to go back to here. So I think they're gonna try to tentatively add to that and be careful with it, and it makes sense from a corporate standpoint. I don't really judge that, if I'm honest. But hopefully we'll get something satisfying at the very least. And I do have that, like you said, that careful optimism towards that. Because you never know. It's a product. It's meant for entertainment, and they can't please everyone. And I might be one of those people who might not be pleased. I might be. You never know. But I am hopeful for it. I think they're gonna do something. I think they listen to community feedback, and I think they do their best to incorporate that, while still trying to look out for their best interest as a company.
Well, I have to give a lot of credit to Paradox, who is now the parent company. It's no
Yes.
longer White Wolf, and it's
Yes.
they've found a company that is very, very proud of its international reach. The fact that they have offices in like the Netherlands and all over the world. So I feel like they've gotten a much better feel for the international experience as well as a variety of perspectives on the material that they write. But they do have a checkered history of mishandling, international affairs. And of course, it was a different time then. We've become a lot more aware and a lot more informed. So they've corrected a lot of those missteps. But from an international perspective, as somebody who has absorbed the material with your own unique experience and upbringing, how do you feel like World of Darkness is doing with this modern direction they're taking as far as the material? Do you think they're being a lot more culturally sensitive? Do you think they're being a lot more accessible and accepting? Or do they still have a uniquely Western perspective on all of this material? How do you think they're doing overall?
I think they're definitely getting better and getting more accepting. I mean, it is one of the reasons why I think like fifth edition appeals more towards Gen Z and people of my age and people younger than us, because they're trying to be more accepting, more open. They put a little bit more emphasis, like considered play and safety tools was even in 23rd edition. It was always there. They were always aware that it was a necessity due to the heavy themes that a story might deal with. But they're putting a little bit more emphasis on it. They're trying to be like, hey, look, like this was always a priority and it still is. Please read these. Please be considerate of these. Please be mindful of the people that you're around. The content warnings that they have put in the like front page of the core book. So I think they are trying and doing better in terms of becoming more inclusive and more open and reaching out to a wider community, of a more international community. Um, I think they're doing better.
So the World of Darkness, one of the things that I think sets it apart from most other game systems is that we do have all these different settings. We have werewolf, we have vampire, we have hunter, and obviously in the older editions we had wraith, we had changeling, mage, all these
Mage.
things. It just went on and on and on. Demon, everything.
Yes.
Uh, you clearly have experience with hunter and with vampire. Have you found yourself interested in some of the other splats? Have you started looking
Mhm,
into things like Wraith, Changeling, Mage, and whatnot?
mhm.
And what are your thoughts on incorporating those types of things into your games?
I have also run Werewolf and finished a Werewolf Chronicle recently, fifth edition, which was a lot of fun. Um, I do generally like all the splats. I haven't had the time to fully get into all of them. I've briefly perused Mage, and I have read Demon almost from the cover to cover. Demon the Fallen. I found it quite interesting when I first got into it. I think it could be a lot of fun for people who are interested in that concept of fallen angels. I like the way they did changes. Though I don't really think Demon might get a fifth edition, if I'm honest. I don't think they'll get into that. But I do my best to try and incorporate them without um, without like choking the setting that I'm trying to do, so to speak. One of the things that I've learned, for example, when I was running Hunter, it is better to use antagonists like changelings and wraiths, mainly because they give that vibe of monster of the week, um, rather than this immortal vampire society that you have to systematically try and hunt while they try to hunt you, and you are an underdog. So I do make more use of these splats and of these different settings in a way to enrich the story, in a way to enrich the world, to show the players that when you do a certain thing, like when you claim a domain as a vampire, for example, or when you clear a building as a hunter, or when you reclaim a spiritual spot as a werewolf, here are the reactions that you're gonna get when you push the world. Something is bound to push back, especially in World of Darkness when you live in such close proximity with these creatures.
Yeah,
So
it's going to
that's the
have
way I
an
try to use it.
impact outside of your particular group. So it's not just going to
Exactly.
impact werewolves, it's going to impact wraiths, it's going to impact
Exactly.
vampires, everything. So it's
Exactly.
going to be felt, and it does enrich the world. It makes it feel more full and it makes it feel
Hmm.
more fleshed out, which again, I think is necessary for a good World of Darkness chronicle. You know,
Agreed.
vampires are not the only thing that goes bump in the night. There are other threats to be dealt
Absolutely.
with and to be felt, and it gives the consequences so much more too. You don't think of it as a player from a one-dimensional perspective of like, okay, which vampire is this going to piss off? You also have to think about like, well, what's the spiritual resonance here, and what do the werewolves think, and what do the
Hmm.
mages think, and like who else could I potentially encounter throughout
Hmm.
this process? So I'm gonna go off track a little bit here. Do you have a history of being a fan of horror? Like, this is a very unique genre that World of Darkness has created, where it really leans into the horror aspect and a lot
Hmm.
less the fantasy or a lot less the
Hmm. Hmm.
adventure. Have you been a fan of horror in the past, and like, what do you think it? How do you think it's influenced you as a storyteller and a game player?
Funnily enough, no, actually, I wasn't really interested in horror. I still am not really like I recently was doing like my military service, and like my friends and I were like exchanging, movie ideas and like shows like what to watch when we get back. And most of their lists were like horror, and I was like, no, thank you. I don't really do horror. But I think the way like I'm more into fantasy and of sci-fi, for example. But I think the way that it influenced me is the lack of horror that I generally don't do. Um, when I started running these games, made me appreciate particularly like personal horror um, a lot more. Like I've also recently watched the AMC's show interview Anne Rice's interview with the vampire, and I think they've also like done amazingly in showing that personal horror of becoming a vampire. Lines like all vampires are born out of trauma. Like I think that fully like captures that experience, and I think there's something so magical about that in itself. Um, so as I mentioned, that like lack of horror in general in my interest area made me appreciate horror a little more. I mean, like, oh, I can get behind this. Same with cosmic horror, for example. Like I like to use elders or like Methuselahs as this background threat if I do use it in my plot, if it's relevant. If I get into the jihad in a really nitty gritty way, I like to make them feel like a cosmic horror, which creates far more tension for a player, in my experience, than them beating someone up or dominating them or using presence on them.
I'm so glad that you said that about not having a horror background, because I tell people all the time I hate horror movies. I don't
Yeah,
go to haunted houses. I don't
no,
do any of the things that people would expect of me, so that when they find out I
absolutely not.
run a horror based game, they're always kind of like, well, how? How do you do that? Like, if you don't enjoy horror, if you don't get
Hmm.
into that stuff. And I think that there are constants in storytelling, whether it's a romantic comedy, whether it's a sci-fi movie, whether it's, a comedy, whatever the case may be. There are these constant threads that go through all storytelling, and if you know how to navigate those threads, you can put a horror bend on them. You can put, you could take something. There's this great series that takes trailers from, romantic comedies and then twists them slightly to make them seem like horror movie trailers. And I think it's absolutely true. Like, really, it's just a lens. Horror is just
Yeah,
a
exactly,
lens on the human experience. And
exactly.
they might throw in some supernatural or some scary, but that's where you get your sci-fi. Like, you can put a horror lens and you get a movie like Alien, which might have ended up like Star Trek. Like, it could have gone
Exactly.
either way depending on which lens you want to look at it through. So I don't think it's a requirement to be a fan of horror to run a game like this, because as long as you can understand the concept of horror, you can take any storyline and make it a horror storyline. A
100% agree.
love story can be a tragic horror story just through some adjustments to details. And so I'm really happy to see that there are other storytellers like yourself out there who are like, yeah, I don't enjoy horror, but I can
Yeah,
tell
no,
one hell of a horror story.
yeah.
Because it's a talent. It's a talent to be able to do that.
I mean, I try to do my best, and like Alien, for example, is definitely one of my favorite like movies in terms of like horror, and that's probably like one of the few horror movies that I've seen. And I think like you said, that having that lens and having that understanding is what allows us to tell that story without being fully interested in a specific genre. I do agree.
So, in all of your exploration into older editions, into different splats that haven't necessarily gotten a fifth edition upgrade, have you noticed a change in the way they're releasing the systems and the way they're balancing the systems? I've talked about this ad nauseum on this show, how I feel like fifth edition is the most balanced, most streamlined, most accessible
Mm-hmm.
version of the game they've had to date. Like, it was impossible to run a hunter and a vampire in the older edition,
Yeah.
rule sets because they just did not have enough commonalities to be able to run them
Mm-hmm.
side by side. But I found in the fifth edition that it is a lot more cross splat possible, that they've done a really good job of, yes, nerfing and downgrading the power levels of these creatures, but that has allowed them to have more of a blend between them. Has that been your experience, and does that make you more apt to trying out some of the new splats that haven't come out yet, or to try and incorporate those things, or maybe even, and this has been a huge demand by some of our viewers, a Monster Squad game where you have a hunter, a werewolf, a vampire, a mage one day, all these things. Like, what are your thoughts on how they've taken the mechanics and the systems with fifth edition versus older editions?
I think I do agree. I think they've definitely like made it so much easier to run a cross-plat game. Like you don't, for example, and stat blocks also like really represented well enough. Like you don't need to have access to the Werewolf the Apocalypse book and the gifts there to actually make a really terrifying werewolf on the go. The stat block allows you that opportunity because they are pretty much like balanced to work together. But and I think it could be interesting to run that like Monster Squad. I think the biggest problem that might be encountered is going to be with Mage, with how wild Mage is. Um, because reality alteration is a nasty business. Um, but I think it can be a lot of fun. I generally like sticking with the splat that I have the premise of, because I think getting too wide makes it harder to tell a more contained
For sure.
story, which I enjoy more. And like I try to make games as sandboxy as possible. I let a city be as much exploration as possible for the players, but at the same time, I also try my best to bring them back to the plot with plot hooks that complement their stories. And I think getting into that cross splat of that Monster Squad story would make it personally harder for me to be able to tell that contained story.
I couldn't agree more. I honestly don't think I'll ever run a Monster Squad game or anything like that, because I feel like, despite the fact that the systems blend really well nicely, and yes, you could
Mm-hmm.
have two different games that have a brief crossover and then go their separate ways. I think that the games themselves, the setting themselves, have a certain tone and a certain
Mm-hmm.
feeling in
Mm-hmm.
them that differs. Like, your
Mm-hmm.
group of werewolves is going to have a completely different perspective and a different feel to their game versus a group of vampires or a group of hunters. So while it might be possible to temporarily have them cross over and have this group of vampires have to get along with this group of werewolves for one
Mm-hmm.
mission and then they go their separate ways, that might be
Mm-hmm.
acceptable. But the idea of having to take all of these varying perspectives, the hunter perspective, the werewolf perspective, the vampire perspective, and smush them all into one game, I think you're just looking at chaos, pure,
Mm-hmm.
utter, unbridled chaos. That
100%.
is going to be a nightmare for the storyteller, because they are still balancing three different sets of
Yeah,
mechanics, no matter
exactly.
how similar they are. Knowing the difference of desperation dice to rage dice to hunger dice
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is a lot to put on a single storyteller for a single
Mm-hmm.
campaign. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, like, while I think it's more possible than ever, and anybody ambitious enough to try it can make
Yeah,
it
go for it.
happen, I think it is a lot to do. But I do like what you said about the stat blocks, the monster stat blocks that they have at the end of the books. They do a really good job of translating and finding the commonalities. So there's like a lot of protean in a werewolf NPC and vampire, whereas it's something different for werewolves fighting vampires. Like, they've found a way to say, well, these are the equivalent gifts that they would
Mm-hmm.
have if they were a vampire using the werewolf system, or these are the equivalent disciplines they would have if they were a werewolf using the vampire system. They did a really good job of that. I know one of the biggest demands I've heard people make, especially guests on the show, is we want a monster manual. We want to have a book where they give us more examples and more possibilities. Like,
Mm,
how would you translate a Toreador using the werewolf system? How would you translate a
mm,
Glasswalker using the vampire system? So I don't think
mm.
we'll ever get that, but I do think it's an
I don't think so
ambitious
either.
thing to
Yeah,
reach for.
it
Um,
is.
One thing that I've seen about World of Darkness 5th edition is their release structure is very interesting to me because
Mm-hmm.
I got on board with Vampire very early on in 5th edition, and they surprised me when they dropped Hunter as their
Mm-hmm.
second major splat release. As Hunter, yes, it did have a good following, a very cult following, but it wasn't nearly as popular as Werewolf or Mage. Those are the three
Yeah.
pillars. I think they always will be. But it was
Mm-hmm.
an interesting choice for them to say, hey, Hunter the Reckoning is the next game we're releasing. And story wise, it made sense.
Mm-hmm.
Mechanics wise, it made sense, but it was very unique. So we've seen a major splat release every year, and then usually one additional book for each splat they've released or have
Mm-hmm.
previously released. Uh, what do you think is the next major splat release, and why is it Mage? Even though we really don't want it to be, and what do you think it should be?
Um, I think I think they mainly first did Hunter instead of Werewolf or Mage is because uh Hunter, like you said, it had that cult following and they probably wanted to culminate that. There's also they've made humans a lot more accessible and playable in general. Like we have now in the player's guide the section to how to start out as a human, to play into the embrace, and then turn the characters into vampires, or how to play as a ghoul. And the Second Inquisition now is a big threat. Like they've made humans a bigger player, not in terms of power, but just in terms of sheer number and capability in the face of the supernatural. And I think they wanted to complement that a little by releasing Hunter the Reckoning first. This is, of course, the narrative part of it, and there's obviously company reasons that I can't really take a big guess. Other than they probably wanted to, like appeal the Hunter fan base,
Well, with
and
the
even
popularity
then,
of Supernatural and Buffy the
yeah,
Vampire
exactly,
Slayer and all these
exactly,
things that have come out, yeah.
exactly, exactly. So that also definitely added to it. And even then, there was some like controversial opinions about it, like removing the imbued, upset a lot of elder edition fans. Even upset me at some point. I was like, well, I wanted to be imbued, but then once I read the book, I got into this new
Yeah,
version
new
of it.
take
I
on it.
found it. Yeah, exactly. I liked it, and I think it's going to be Mage mainly because of the popularity, but maybe Wraith could have been a little better considering they kind of teased it a little bit. A VR game came out. Wraith is like specters and wraiths
I
are
love
very
Wraith.
popular. I have the 20th year book. I still haven't properly read it. One of my previous storytellers really begged me to like get into it, but I hadn't had the time. I was building up my network at the time. Um, I'm gonna get into it eventually, but I think Wraith could have been the better choice for the release because also they're like one of the primary monsters that you can encounter in Vampire, which is the biggest splat that World of Darkness has. Like the Hekata fully deal with wraiths. And if you don't have a Hekata, you can just go to a Tremere who can give you wards, who can find if you have a spirit problem. You can go to a Malkavian who can do a little session for you. Like you just encounter wraiths, I think, the most after werewolves as a vampire. And I think adding that splat, introducing the wraith after a VR game would have made more sense. But they
Well,
must
and
have looked at the
fleshing
popularity
out
and the demand.
Yeah,
And
fleshing out the setting a lot more, I think, could be very informative to storytellers of other games. No, I couldn't agree with you more. I think Wraith makes way more sense as the next drop. I
mhm.
have never found any inspiration from Mage. I have kept it away with the 10-foot pole, like really trying to avoid it as best as
It's
possible.
so wild. It's crazy.
And I think that yes, Mage would make sense as it is so popular and it would be a big sell. But I think that once you have Vampire, Werewolf, and Mage out there, interest is going to wane.
Mm-hmm.
Sales are going to wane for anything else that you release after those three are on the
Mm-hmm.
shelf. I think while you've got people on the hook from a purely business perspective, I think it makes sense to save Mage for last and to just be
Mm-hmm.
like, we're going to release our Wraith, we're going to release Changeling, we're going to drop a couple of others,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll release Mage to really put a bookend on our major releases. And then, of course, we'll do settings and stuff like that beyond there.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
I definitely think, especially with the potential that you had mentioned earlier, that Wraith could or Mage could break everything. Like if Mage is
Yeah.
done incorrectly, even a little, if there's even a slight power discrepancy or imbalance, it
Mm-hmm.
could break everything for everybody who's trying to run multi-splat games or trying to,
Mm-hmm.
be as true to all the material as possible. It has too much potential to cause problems. So I
Yeah.
think that again, work it out, play test it, take your time, don't rush this release
100% agree.
because Werewolf was really well done, and I think part of that is attributed to the time they were bought with Hunter and some of the stuff that
Mm-hmm.
they play tested in Hunter. I think Wraith
Mm-hmm.
and Changeling would make great opportunities to start sprinkling in some of the mage mechanics and seeing
Definitely.
how they fare before dropping the big release of this is our mage system and how it could fuck up all your other games. I think that it would be good to just give it the extra time, give it a lot of playtesting, a lot of trying things in other splats before dropping that release. So I'm really glad that you mentioned Wraith. Thankfully, we don't know for sure, even though
Exactly. Maybe it'll
most of
be
my
Wraith.
bets are on Mage.
Same.
Um, I
Same.
think that it would be really nice to see them drop a lesser release. I
Mm-hmm.
do that in quotations because I love Wraith, but a less popular release like Wraith as a bridge from Werewolf to
Mm-hmm.
Mage. I think it would make all the sense in the world to do that. Or Changeling. Changeling's got a
Yeah.
huge cult fan base too, so they could drop Changeling instead. But yeah, try it before you really drop a whole bunch of money into it and then have to release a bunch of edits and updates and addendums saying like, "Hey, we screwed up. Sorry." I think it would make more business sense to really play test it out to
Definitely
its
agree.
full. Do your due diligence to the nth degree. But yeah, I couldn't recommend Wraith more. I think it's a fantastic system and it's definitely worth a read. So give yourself the
I
chance to
will.
look into that
I
because
will.
it
I
is very
will.
very good. So I want to talk more now about you just storytelling, you
Mm-hmm.
DMing, you taking on this challenge of becoming a professional, which even I haven't done to this very day, out of fear and anxiety. But what was it about storytelling, taking that driver's seat of creating these games, managing these games? Because there's a lot that goes into it. It's I
Mm-hmm.
think that everybody should try it at one point or another to see if it's for them. But I think that to do it, especially with the frequency and the intensity that you do it with so many accomplishments already under your belt. I mean, 300 games. Holy cow, man. Uh, like, what was it about storytelling that really pulled you in and appealed to you and made you want to do this thing?
Um, I've I've kind of always been into like fiction. I started first like writing. I first started with fan fictions, which are really bad. Thank God they're no longer on the face of Earth. But I started writing with fan fictions, and then I got into doing my own stories online. So I always had an interest in telling stories. I find it as a perfect means of escape, telling stories and just fiction and stories in general. Um, and once I discovered that I can share it, not in a written format, but also include other people in it and to form that bond over characters and over this collective experience, it just captivated me. It felt so fun, just even in the concept that like I mentioned, like the first time when I first found out about D&D, I was like, I gotta tell my friends about it. Like I want to share this. Um, and once I started doing that, I wanted to also just share it with other people because I realized when I was looking for games, the ratio between storyteller and player is immensely unbalanced. So many players and just so little GMs in general, which you know, makes sense. People have their lives. There's work. There's other things in personal life, and obviously, it can be very daunting. My general approach to anything that can be daunting is to just take that first step, because once you do that, you will know if it is for you or not, and there is nothing to be afraid of it. Um, and if it doesn't appeal to you, if you don't feel comfortable with it, if you just don't like taking all of that associated responsibility of the writing, of the ambience, of the images, of the stats, if you want to get into that, I think if that doesn't just appeal to you, if it feels too much, then that's no problem. But if you take that first step, you find out if that is the case. And maybe, like my situation, you'll see it's vice versa, that you really enjoy setting these like rules, being almost like a director of a movie, but with far more leniency, with far more cooperation. And maybe you'll enjoy that so much that you'll want to keep doing it. But unless you take that first step, you'll never know. So that's generally like was my approach to it. And I was like, I'm just gonna do it. And I did, and I had a blast with it, and I still am having a blast with it. I run at this point, because two of my games have like concluded. I am currently on 4 games a week. I'm gonna go up to 6 games a week in the near future.
That's
So
absolutely amazing. And
yeah.
I saw that you do consider yourself a writer, which is amazing because I think there is such a connection between writers and storytellers. Like I think that
Mhm.
it goes hand in hand. And I'm always completely blown away by writers because my own ADHD doesn't allow me to have enough focus to be able to sit down and be like, okay, what are all these different people thinking and how are they interacting? Like I need that X element or that X
Mm,
factor of player involvement to keep me on my heels. Like I'm a very
mhm,
improv storyteller, so I
mhm,
love having the input from these other sources to keep me guessing and to constantly inspire me. But I do think there's so much in common, and I can't cast enough praise on people who can do that just by themselves. I need the other people. I need the players just as bad as they need me to keep me constantly motivated and inspired with it, because the idea of sitting down and writing a book, and I don't know how people have done this for centuries now, of just like, I'm going to tell an entire story with characters that are fully fleshed out and have their own motivations and all this stuff. It's beyond me to do that all by yourself. It's beyond me. I've written my best stories with other people, and I don't even consider myself the author. I consider the whole group the author because I think that it is such a collaborative storytelling process, and I think World of Darkness, more so than most other games I've played, is much about that. Like they're all about collaborative storytelling. Everybody's kind of the storyteller, even if they are taking a much more direct perspective on the story from a specific character. Everybody's telling the story together, and I love that about the storytelling experience. So, what are your kind of thoughts on that as writing versus storytelling, and what the differences are, but where the similarities lie too?
I think you've put it like really perfectly. In a tabletop game, when you're doing GMing, I think the entire group is the author. The entire group are like, we are all the storytellers. I just happen to be the guy who decides the rulings of it because people were okay with me doing that. And whereas in writing, I still haven't went to publishing, so I don't really I don't try to be fancy about it, but I've been doing my own writing for about 10 years by this point. I have put stories online. I have had people give me feedback. I have done my research on it. At least I'd like to think that I've garnered enough experience to tell the biggest difference is the collective experience versus just being the singular entity that decides what is the beginning, middle, and the end of this story that I want to tell, and what's the point? What do I want to get across? Whereas in tabletop, you kind of try to do that together. Instead of giving it to an audience, you do it for yourselves, for this little group that you gather around and tell the story with. You decide what do you want one player and the rest of the table to gain from the story of character A and the character B and the character C. and that collective experience definitely makes tabletop and storytelling very special, very unique in its own way.
So you talked about safety tools earlier, and I'm
Mhm.
definitely showing my age here because safety tools is still a rather new concept to me. I only really got it heard about safety tools and consent sheets like 3 years
Mhm.
ago or 4 years ago
Mhm.
when I started having to play with strangers online.
Right.
But before that, it was just like you know your friends, you know what they're comfortable with or uncomfortable with, or you find out through play and you avoid those things in the future. But now it's kind of like a necessity, mandatory, and I'm glad it exists. I really am because I've seen how toxic certain parts of the gaming community can get,
Totally.
and so I think I'm glad these things exist so that we can keep it safe for everyone. But how do you incorporate safety tools into your games? What kinds do you use? How do you introduce them? What's like a session
Mhm.
zero like for you?
So I generally first send it like in any game that I do, I first send a consent form or a consent checklist to get the lines and veils of my players of what they're comfortable with and what they would be, they would want to discuss it beforehand and what they would simply not want in the game. And there's generally like, unless it's marked like, hey, let's talk about this in private, there's generally no discussion about it. If something is said, I don't like it, I don't ask about it, I just simply take it out. And if the player says, hey, this is something that like I'm a little uncomfortable with, let's talk about it, I reached out to them, I asked them which parts of it that makes them uncomfortable, which part, like how far are they willing to go with it, how where should I stop? Where should anyone at the table stop when it involves that specific topic? I get their feedbacks and emotions on it, and then I let the other players know when it comes to session zero. When we get to the section of the session zero where we talk about safety, I tell them, so here are the veils that I expect everyone to be respectful of. Here is the stopping point, and I explain it to them, and I explained to them that if they go overboard, that I will warn them first, and if they don't heed the warning, they will have to leave the table. So I set that expectation early on, um, and to kind of also ward off potential toxic people as well in different gaming communities. To be like, so hey, if you are not able to respect these, I am not the GM for you. And session zero generally goes by first explaining what I want to do, and then ask what I expect from my players as a GM, and then I ask what they want to do as players and what are their expectations from me as a GM, to see how well, like how much on the same page we are, and how much I need to adjust and accommodate, and how much I expect them to adjust and accommodate, not just for me, but for the rest of the table as well. I try to be that mediator in that area. And then we get to the excuse me, we get to the safety part, as I mentioned, go over every line and veil that has been stated. I tell them that I also make use of X and O cards where they can tell me by either the way of DMs or using reactions on the virtual tabletops we use. Since we're not in the same room, they don't have the option to pull up a card, but they can put those emoji reactions on their screen of like an X or an N or an O, and I will know and I will take the appropriate action towards it. I take breaks. I take time to talk to my players after the game. I to go over the things their character have gone through to see if there is any potential bleed, um, to give them the opportunity to vent out their feelings or possible frustrations that might have happened through the course of the play, and do my best to give them aftercare once the session is concluded, to make sure the table is as safe and as welcoming as possible.
So storytellers often find themselves in the role of therapist because
Yeah.
gaming can be a good exercise in therapy. In fact, it's been incorporated into a lot of therapy practices, into schools. It's been brought in a variety of ways. However, we are also, at least a good majority of us, except for a few exceptions, unqualified for this. We
Yeah.
didn't go to school for it. We don't have the proper training. Do you have a way of kind of monitoring your own levels of, this is something I am capable of handling. This is something maybe that's a little above my pay grade. And how do you handle situations like that when you do run into situations like bleed or, other kind of encounters where it may be pressing the lines of what you are comfortable dealing with? How do you handle those situations? Because I've
I
seen a lot
mean,
of storytellers kind of fall into pit traps of like, oh
mm,
no, this person's developing like a dependency on me or a codependency or whatever the case may be. Like, how do you handle those situations?
I mainly talk to my girlfriend. It helps. She's a part of my pretty much all my tables. Um, Generally, if I am struggling with a situation where I might be suffering from a certain amount of bleed or frustration, I sit down with her, I talk to her. She helps me regulate those emotions, and helps me put my thoughts in order. And that's definitely helpful. Finding someone that not in a, not like like you said, like not like getting into that therapy situation, but more like just talking and venting that frustration out, to having an ear to listen to you definitely helps. And someone who can give constructive feedback on it definitely helps a great deal. And I have had situations where players have latched on to me a little bit, where eventually for the most part, I try to be as gentle as possible while trying to tell them to seek out more, like if they're struggling with something, to seek out professional help. Um, Share my own experience in that people around me have, had with professional help, and how much it helped them. Like for example, I tell them if a friend of mine has had great success with therapy, I tell them about it, to be encouraging to seeking that help. If they are struggling with something that they're trying to figure out, I try to, as gently as I can, lead them towards that path. And if it's not possible, then it is best at some point we have to also preserve ourselves. It is best to, in a nice but strict way, to tell them that you are not the person to handle these unless you are a professional. So that's my general approach and experience
Well, and
with
it's
that.
fantastic too that you have a partner that is so invested and involved as you are, because it's
Hmm.
an extra set of eyes on the situation. It can
Hmm.
be like, hey,
Absolutely.
are you
Yeah.
aware that this person's
Hmm.
getting this way? Or like, hey, I
Hmm.
see some red flags here. Like,
Hmm.
let's discuss those and get to the bottom of those. Like, it's really good that you have that other input. Do you
Absolutely.
find that having a partner who is also a player in your games, has there ever been any conflict that has arisen from that? Because I love that when couples can game together, they stay together. I've found that
Oh
to
yeah.
often be the case. But I've also seen it be an imposing on people's marriages and people's friendships and relationships. So how do you balance all of that? Like how do you balance a healthy relationship with this kind of extra element that the game brings into the relationship?
We've never honestly struggled with that. We've always had like great chemistry from day one, and when we like got into games, like it didn't really prove a challenge. There, I think the biggest thing is that when we first established that I will not be favoring, that I won't be doing favoritism. If I'm and I also like I'm very actively aware that sometimes players might be worried about it, so I do my
The
best
DM's
to
girlfriend or boyfriend has
exactly.
always been a thing. People are always
Yeah,
nervous about joining a
exactly.
table like that. Yep.
Exactly. So I generally tell them beforehand that my partner's at the table with me, and try to assure them that there won't be favoritism. And when play happens, I do my best to also actively show that by if if my partner fucks around, she finds out, just like any other player would. And I try to be as accommodating and just with my rulings and with the consequences of choices and actions. um, and she has never raised issues with that. She was very accepting of that, and she said that she wouldn't expect anything less anyways. So because we have that had that understanding from the get-go, it never really caused much problem or friction like in our relationship. And at least I personally haven't noticed any player
That's good.
saying,
Yeah.
like, I've never had a player saying, "Hey, you're doing favoritism," or I've never noticed any player particularly getting aggravated with that, because again, I try to be very mindful of a concern like that being present, and I try to appease such concerns to the best of my ability.
Well, and it's a really good thing too that you've had the discussion that you can separate the relationship from the game, that you don't
Hmm.
have that concern of favoritism or going harder
Hmm.
on them or them taking something from the game as a slight on the relationship. Like those are
No, no.
really important things to establish that I think is kind of a
Mhm.
rookie mistake for new storytellers that want to
It
have,
is.
their partner at the table, that they do fall into those pitfalls. And it sounds like you're impressing the hell out of me for only doing this for a few years. Like, my
Thank
God,
you.
you've got such maturity and
Thank you.
awareness as a storyteller that usually takes a lot of trial and error to get to that place. But you are light years ahead of people that have done
Appreciate
this for
that.
a lot longer than you. So now I want to talk about Start Playing, and I'm going to bring up the graphic here again to show people your
Mhm.
page. Uh, you got into professional storytelling, which is still, again, like safety tools, an unfamiliar concept to me, because this is
Mhm.
like this was the dream that a lot of us had growing up,
Yes.
that never seemed possible. But you have this page, startplaying.game/gm/Onur Tenal, or Tamal, which you can find
Temel, yeah.
linked down in the description down below. I encourage everyone to go check it out. But what is incredible about this is the amount of courage and confidence and boldness, and I mean this all as positives because it is such a rare thing to take that leap. What made you decide to get with Start Playing? What made you decide to, get involved and sign up? What was that process like for you? I mean, I'm sure there was a great deal of anxiety at first,
There was.
and especially since it's a very saturated community. Like,
Mhm.
what was that experience like, and that transition like, for people who
Mhm.
might be looking to get into something like that?
So I was originally referred to Start Playing by a friend, um, who, yeah, I don't know how he found out at the time, but they referred it to me, and I checked it out. And at first, like you said, I was kind of apprehensive about it. I didn't know much about this website, and but it was also offered to me as a way of like finding more players, because World of Darkness official server doesn't let us advertise for paid services, which is, fair. Um, I don't begrudge that. But it kind of and at the time I was primarily only doing Vampire the Masquerade, and I wasn't doing any other games at that point. And it was a struggle to find new players, and I was also starting at a very low rate. When I first started, I was charging just $5. um, and I wanted to build myself up, and I found Start Playing could have been that jump, but they also, take a bit of percentage, which is again also fair. But at the time when I was first getting into it, I was just very cautious about that, and it ended up becoming a necessity for me. So PayPal doesn't work here. A little context there.
Okay.
Yeah, PayPal doesn't operate in Turkey at this point, and I was mainly using Western Union, but for whatever reason, my Western Union account also stopped working. Like, people couldn't send in the money, and they were getting frustrated. I was getting frustrated, so I was like, okay, we ball. So I decided to sign up for Start Playing appropriately and made my games there. So it was mainly driven by, like, I had no other choice if I still wanted to do my profession and get paid for it. Um, but it has been most rewarding, I should say, in the sense that I have had the pleasure of knowing a lot of people who have reached out to me. It definitely helped me expand in terms of a player base. I have about like 36 players who have reviewed me there, but I have had definitely around 45 to 50 in total, people who have been part of my games who later on left for, personal reasons, or we didn't really bode well. But it helped me get in touch with a wider amount of people within the tabletop community. So
Well,
it has been definitely rewarding.
You've got glowing reviews. I mean, you honestly have fantastic reviews. Your players
Yeah.
obviously love what they do. They've had some of the utmost compliments to say. The fact that you have over 350 games hosted, that's an incredible accomplishment. 2 years doing this out of the what, 3, maybe 4 years that you've been doing it overall.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
an incredible accomplishment.
Thank you. Thank
How
you.
do you stay relevant? How do you like make a mark? Because it is a very saturated community. I mean,
Yes.
most of the storytellers we've talked to all have story start playing accounts. You know, you've got to kind of have something that sets you apart or makes you individual in
Mhm.
comparison to others. What are some tactics that you use or some strategies you use to try and keep yourself like noticeable and standing out from
Mhm.
others?
Um, what I've noticed that has helped the best is just being as quick as possible in responses when someone is interested. It definitely helps. Having a bit of a colorful adventure page and a colorful bio where people can feel you're approachable definitely helps. I try my best to like I can't always go to my start playing profile to see if there's anything that I need to tweak and to change to make myself appear as approachable as possible, because that's how you attract people. And as far as remaining relevant, I found is just the best way is just constantly running games and constantly advertising them to the best of your abilities. You know, I go to Reddit, I make posts, I go to D&D Beyond if I'm running D&D, I go to Roll20, making forums, just advertising yourself really if you're not paying ads or making social media content, advertising for your games and running games as consistently and constantly as possible make that keeps you relevant. um that's how I've been able to like run up to 6 games a week.
Well, and offering a variety of systems also has to
That
help
also
in the
helps
fact that you have
definitely.
Hunter, you have, you know,
Hmm.
Vampire, you have D&D, like D&D being the mainstay of gaming systems. It's
Hmm.
like a D and
Hmm.
d storyteller on Start Playing is a dime a dozen, but Vampire
Hmm.
storytellers, those are fewer and further between.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
offering a wide lexicon of possibilities, I think, is
Hmm.
also
Hmm.
a great advantage that you have. Plus, running unique material I think must be a benefit to you because like how many people have run Curse of Strahd? How many people have run Minds of Phandelver? You
Hmm.
know, these pre-written adventures, you could
Hmm.
play them 100 times in a day on one of these services. But you having something like Prague by Night, something that really stands out as like you're not going to find a lot of this game. There's
Hmm.
probably only the one. Like how many
Hmm.
people choose that setting? So let's try and fill some seats here because I see that you do have Prague by Night listed. You do have a couple of seats open, and let's try and pay some bills and fill some seats and expose people to you. Tell me about Prague by Night. Like, let's hear the sales
Okay.
pitch of this story,
Um,
this game, and what the deal
my
is with that.
goodness. My goodness. Okay. So, some people, some of the viewers could be familiar with Prague with both the meta plot and with the game Vampire the Masquerade Blood Hunt being taking place in Prague. This current chronicle is taking place after the disaster that is the second convention of Prague, where the Prince Marcus has been assassinated and a major Second Inquisition operation has nearly wiped out the Kindred Society, and then suddenly retreated with no trace of where they've gone to. And in the chaos, we see a neonate, a vampire that is not even 100 years old, manage to rise to the position of prince, which brings out many kindred from hiding and from different domains. That draw of power and this vacuum of blood and domain is the main attraction for neonate. So it is neonate focused vampire chronicle, a political and street level game where we focus more on individual domains and trying to establish some sort of I suppose establish oneself, one's own coterie in these now empty domains where many elders and many ancillae have been destroyed by the Inquisition, and more and more restless spirits are beginning to appear alongside the vampires that are starting to travel to Prague to see the reign of and the court of this new neonate prince. So that is the kind of main premise. It's intrigue, politics, bit of romance, should players can consent to that, and a lot of mystery about how did this neonate manage to rise so quickly in the span of few months, and is it possible for other neonates to achieve the same rise? And will the players be one of them, or should they want to destroy the system? Will they choose to go that route?
Oh, I'm completely sold. As a long-term player, you hit all my hot button keywords there with intrigue and possible
Appreciate that.
romance and all this other stuff. So if you're
Appreciate
interested in that kind of storytelling, go check out the page, go sign up for the game, get involved. I could tell you're working with a fantastic storyteller, and I haven't even had a chance to play, but with the knowledge base that you've shown here tonight, and your obvious passion for this art form, and it really is an art form, uh, it would be well worth the money to get involved in one of these tables and get into one of these chronicles. Another project that you've kind of clued me into when we were talking about things was the Suck Club, and I'm going to bring up
Yes.
this page. It's on X, as far as I know. That's the link I have for it. It's x.com/the Suck Club. And it mentions Istanbul by Night. It talks about coming soon. What's going on with this? Why don't you let me in and give me a little bit of tea here, because I'm very interested. When I saw this page, I had to give it an immediate follow because I was like, "There's something happening here," and I definitely want others to turn eyes to it. So, tell me about the Suck Club. What's the deal with this?
Okay. Um, so the Suck Club is going to be our social platform where we will be releasing our upcoming actual play, Istanbul by Night, taking place in modern nights, um, at the city of Istanbul. Some might know as Constantinople. Um, it is going to be, I don't want to spoil much about it. We are going to be focusing on the mystery that is Istanbul. It has so much history in terms of Vampire the Masquerade from Dark Ages, and we will explore how much of the res- the residual effects of those nights, of the society of undead that has been formed there. Mainly, we will focus on young vampires who are in one of the most ancient domains of the world, and how can they survive in such a cutthroat place where you have to deal in this like wield and deal grand fashion, um, as well as the, of course, the personal horror and angst of being young vampires and reconciling with that fact. So it is currently a project in development. I have pretty much finished all the world building that is needed for this project. We are currently looking for players. I'll be soon adding advertisement for it. Um, so anyone who would like to be part of that project, we're going to try to be as professional as possible about it. It has to be a virtual actual play. So the premise is going to be, besides the game story, obviously, the premise of the streams and the actual play is going to be the most professional home game you've ever seen.
I love that.
That's the kind of aim of the project.
Well, and for those who have been involved with St. Pete by Night, they know the impact Constantinople had on our setting and how we
Mm,
brought in elements of the Trinity and the cult of Michael and
yes.
everything like that. So it is a
Mhm.
very, very, very cool and unique location with a lot of history. And the fact that this game is going to be focused primarily on that central point should be very, very appealing to lore junkies of St. Pete by Night and those who have been obsessed with our setting. So I definitely encourage everyone to head over to X and give them a follow. and stay up to date on the news of that. And who knows, maybe one of the amazing individuals of our community will end up on that game,
I hope so.
especially
I
when
hope so.
there's openings available, because I think that's such a cool opportunity. A lot of people wonder, how do they get into streams? How do they, join
Mhm.
tables like that? That sounds like an opportunity you don't want to pass up. So go give a follow over there. So, as we're getting to the end of the interview here, I want to ask some rapid fire kind of lightning round questions
For
that the
sure.
community always has. As this is a pre-tape, the people can't ask it live in the chat as
Mhm.
this is happening.
Mhm.
So we're going to do it based off of my memory of people's
Mhm.
usual go-to questions. One, what's your favorite clan and
Toreador.
why? Toreador.
Um,
Oh, okay.
yeah, yeah, Toreador because well, mainly I feel closer to these tortured artists who get fascinated by the beautiful things around them. Secondly, Lestat de Lyoncourt. Yeah,
Absolute Toreador, without a question. Like,
he
undoubtedly.
invented that
He
clan.
invented the Toreador for sure.
Exactly.
What is a clan that you have always wanted to play as a player, but haven't had
Mhm.
the opportunity to? Obviously, as storytellers, we kind of inhabit every clan, but we never
Mhm.
necessarily get to give them the full in depth detail that we would as a player. What's a clan
Mhm.
you've always wanted to play as a player?
Um, got all of them. But if I have to pick one, I think it has to be Thin Blood. I like these new kids around the block who get these weird powers from basically doing drugs, and they're just mixing all these weird things into this alchemy. And I think they're closest to humanity. I like that personal horror and angst that comes from that being
The
so
story
close to the sun but
opportunities.
not
Yeah.
being able to touch it.
Yep.
Um, so I think they definitely Thin Blood has to take the lead here.
I always think Thin Bloods are also kind of vampire on hard mode because they have a
Yeah,
lot more challenges, and I think that
yeah,
World of
absolutely.
Darkness games in general are all about the challenges and leaning into as many of them as you can get. So
Exactly.
I think that's a fantastic, fantastic answer. Now, this is going to be controversial. What's the most overrated clan?
Hmm. I'm reluctant to say this because I see you have that tattoo.
I do have the tattoo. Don't come after my Malkavians.
No,
How
no, no.
dare you?
Look, I love my Malkavians. I love my I love my tortured God, I forgot the word. Spiritual vampires. But I
The
think
Seers.
the Seers, thank you. I think definitely some of the most overrated clans has to be the Malkavians and the La Sombra. I see them being very popular, and don't get me wrong, I also love the La Sombra. What is this Ventrue slander about La Sombra being the superior? I just disagree. La Sombra is Ventrue discount, but whatever.
Well, it's
um,
interesting because mostly it's the opposite answer. I get a lot of people love
I
their
know,
Lasombra and love their
I know,
Malkavians and hate their Toreador. And so it's nice to hear that there are opposing views because I love them all equally. Like I mean, Malkavians can
same.
always have my heart, but I do see where you're coming from. I do think that Malkavians are tricky to play and can be
Mhm,
played incorrectly.
exactly.
And same with Lasombra. Like I do see the comparisons to Ventrue, and I do think it's two opposing viewpoints or approaches to kind
Mhm,
of a similar end goal. But I do
exactly.
think that I've seen Lasombra played badly, and I've seen them played very well. So
Exactly.
it's a much bigger spectrum. But yeah, the fact
Mhm.
that Toreador is your favorite is a unique viewpoint on this show that we've had so far. A lot of people give Toreador a lot of problems, but my prince in my city is a Toreador. I love me some Toreador, and
Exactly.
I totally get behind that. Now let's go over to to werewolf. What's your favorite
Okay.
werewolf tribe? As now you've had some werewolf experience.
Oh, it's my favorite. God, hard question. Um, I really like Children of Gaia. It's also like the tribe like my partner was also really interested in. So we really got to like do in-depth research on it together. And I like them in terms of they seem to be closest to what the Garu was meant to be when they were as a concept of
Mm-hmm.
these keepers of balance of natural life before the whole Imperium happened, before werewolves lost their way. I think they're very cool, but I also really like Silver Fangs. I have a thing about I also like Venture, as you might have told. So
Yeah.
I have a soft spot for these these characters who are like heavy as the head that wears the crown, that struggle that they tend to go through. I quite enjoy seeing those stories, but those have to be two of my favorites, and Gale Stalkers,
And
because
what?
big
Well,
bad
yeah,
wolf.
Gale Stalkers. You get the North Wind. You get the
Exactly, you
very
get the big
like
bad wolf
Arctic.
experience.
Yeah, absolutely. What about
Pardon me.
auspices? What auspices intrigue
Ooh.
you the most, or do you enjoy the most?
So generally when I'm a player, I like playing social characters. Um, and that's mainly why I think I really like Galliard. I like these bards around the fire who go into their glabro form and do these snarls and howls that really rile up the other Garu, give them, inspire them, give them rage.
They keep
Having
the
that
silver record. They tell the
Exactly,
stories. Like, oh,
exactly.
for sure,
I mean,
for sure.
I don't think it's a surprise a storyteller liking storyteller concept is goes without saying. But yeah, that's definitely the main allspice that I'm most interested in. Followed by Theurge, because I think werewolf is as much spiritual as it is about tearing people apart when they need to be killed. And I like that Theurges have that special connection with spirits and the mission of the Garu.
And what about your D&D class? Your go-to D&D class?
Am I basic if I say paladin?
No, I think paladins are great. I
I
like the way they've evolved too. I like that it's
agreed.
not the cops of D&D
Mm-hmm.
anymore, that they have
Mm-hmm.
a lot more depth and
Yeah.
range to them than
Yeah.
they used to have. So,
Definitely.
yeah.
Paladin is definitely my go-to, followed by Wizard and Fighter.
Okay.
I like fighters a lot. Wizards, obviously, like that juicy spell book full of spells. The creativity that comes from being able to describe the spell effects and that connection with magic, I think is very cool. And fighters is every like at some point every every basic boy's fantasy of picking up a sword and just bonking
Beating
something,
something. Yep.
beating something up, being that Aragorn, living that Aragorn fantasy. That's mainly why like fighter takes the third for me.
And what do you think is the most overrated D&D class?
I don't think there is one. I'm not sure if I'm honest. Maybe Rogue. If,
Be
I
still
think
my rogue heart.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's just I don't know. Rogue never appealed to me that much. Um, just didn't.
That's fair. No,
Sorry.
that's totally fair. I love opposing viewpoints. I love
Mm.
differing viewpoints. You came after my Malkavians. You came after my rogues. You're a guest. This is
Yeah, I'm
my house,
targeting you.
damn it. How dare you? No, I love it. I love to. That's what makes it fun. I
Mhm.
love working with people who don't think the same as me, because if we did, it'd be boring. It's nice
Exactly.
to get a spice and throw
I
a
agree.
jalapeno in the candy dish, as I like to say.
Hmm.
Like, it's totally perfect, and
Hmm.
I think it's fantastic. My last question, and then we're gonna let you plug anything you want to plug and put a bow on this thing. What advice would you give to people who want to become storytellers? Like the things that are holding them back, the things that are intimidating them about it. What can you tell them that might help get them past some of the hurdles that they run into and really get them to give this wonderful experience that you and I both know the joys of, to give it a try?
The advice I would give, I think, is something I kind of touched upon. The only thing really holding you back is you. And if you never take that first step, so long as you're surrounded by good people, if you're running a game for your friends, or if you decided that you want to run games for strangers, so long as you're sure that you have good, decent people around you, most of your worries and anxieties are really in your own head. And I recommend at least taking that first step to see if this is for you or not. And just, I guess, to quote from one of my favorite movies, it's just a leap of faith. So just do that, and once you like it, find what works best for you as a GM. If it's rule of cool, it's rule of cool. If it's sticking by the book, it's sticking by the book. Whatever it is, just gotta remember that you are the only one who should really judge yourself and no one else. And don't do it too harshly. You're good. You are great. If you're already interested, then that means you have something worth telling, and don't be afraid of telling that story. That would be my
Absolutely.
advice.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And just as a side note on that, communication, just tell your players the
Absolutely.
truth. Be honest. This is my
Absolutely.
first time. You'll be surprised at how forgiving and how much
Hmm.
space and grace they give you when you just are honest about it. Everyone knows what
Absolutely.
it's like to be the first time playing, the first time running for a lot of the seasoned storytellers. If you're
Hmm.
honest, they will accept you for it. And if they don't, they're not the type of people you want to run for anyway. You
Exactly.
want people who are in it for the journey, regardless of what that journey is. So just communicate it to your players.
100%.
Onur, you have been an incredible guest. I'm
Thank
so
you.
grateful we
Thank
got
you.
the opportunity to talk and that you took the
I'm
time
grateful
out of
you
your
gave me the
day.
opportunity.
We're almost 2 hours here, and I could keep
Oh,
going for
jeez.
another four because there's so much to
Same,
dig
honestly.
into. So I
Hmm.
hope we can have you back at some point down the road to have a follow
Ho-
up because I'd love to hear about
Hopefully.
Prague. Maybe once Istanbul is off the ground, we can talk about that and promote that because
I'd love to.
what a fantastic, fantastic interview this has been. A great conversation this
Thank
has
you.
been. I want to give you space now to promote anything you want to promote, whether it's a project you're working on or a friend's project. This is your chance to just go nuts and promote all the things.
I mean, thank you. I mean, you've pretty much done all the promoting for me. Thank you again for all of that. And I guess I can only just repeat it. Please feel free to check out my Start Playing link and the games that I have there. If you have any particular interest in a given setting or a um, game system, feel free to reach out to me to ask about it anytime. I am generally always active, always on my computer, and I will get back to you as fast as I can. Yeah, check out my games, check out my X and the Suck Club X if you want to keep in touch with my upcoming projects and games. And yeah, that's really all I got.
Well, I'm going to add on to that by saying all the links for all of these things are down below, but let's show the pages once more. We've got Onur's start playing page here, startplaying.games/GM /Onur Temel. You can find that there. Go check that page out, bookmark it, join some of those games. We also have their X page here, x.com/__ Onur Temel. Excuse me, Onur Temel. Go give that a follow. And then, of course, we have the Suck Club page. Let me bring that up really quick. X.com/the Suck Club for all the information on Istanbul by Night. Go give all these things a follow. Let's keep the community supporting one another so that we can all be doing this for a very, very long time to come. It's nothing but a few clicks, and it could mean the world to these growing, amazing community that we have that we want to see succeed and expand beyond these nights that we have been living in currently. Again, thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank
This has
you.
been an incredible
Thank you.
opportunity. Everybody, go follow Onur. Go follow St. Pete by Night if you're a first time viewer here. We've got all our socials down below. And if you're interested in learning the world of darkness, if you're interested in trying your hand at it, we have our own Discord server, discord.gg/St. Pete by Night. We've got one shots running all the time, new storytellers, trying out their first games and creating their first tables. There's a lot of opportunities, and it's just a great community to hang out in and chat World of Darkness. So come join us. But for my wonderful guest, I'm Kent, and thank you so much for joining us here tonight. And we'll see you next time here on St. Pete by Night After Dark. Have a lovely evening, everyone.